Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast. And joining me is my co-host, Stephen Kerr, 65 plus years in sports journalism. Between the two of us, now part of the Believe Network, now in our 11th year as a podcast. Later in the show, which three Astros are our biggest concern right now? That's going to be tough to narrow down a little bit, just to three. But Stephen, the Texans storyline the last few days is the possible return of J.J. Watt. Did you raise an eyebrow when you heard that?
Not really, Robert. I didn't, because you would expect this kind of talk, I think, to happen. I mean, JJ is only, a year removed from retirement? It's not, I mean, if it was 10 years from now, yeah, I certainly would raise my eyebrow. I mean, it's like, a few months ago, I think I heard something that, Tom Brady would consider coming back to play for a team if they really needed him. This kind of thing comes up a lot, Robert. And, it's my understanding, at least judging from the conversation that it sounded like it went down, is that it wasn't D'Amico Ryans that approached JJ about this and said, hey, what do you think about coming back? It seemed that JJ was the one who was more kicking the tires on, what kind of a reaction he might get, and saying, hey, you guys need me, if things, getting a real dire situation, you need me, I'll do it, but I'm only going to do it this year. And I'm still training and this kind of thing. So it makes me think that JJ's the one that's kind of missing it a little bit and just kind of seeing what the reaction of the team is. But here's my thing, Robert. I love JJ Watt as much as anybody, but he's been removed from the game for a year. While he wasn't terrible, he certainly wasn't the JJ that we're used to seeing after the injuries. And even when he went to Arizona, just not quite, the standard that the Texans, I think, would need in their current situation.
Yeah, and just for those who missed it, JJ said he told D'Amico last year, quote, don't call unless you absolutely need it. But if you do, I'll be there. And D'Amico responded Monday by saying, I need him now. I need him to make that call right now. Anytime JJ Watt's ready to go, I'm ready to go. A little bit of smile, a little bit of wink. I don't know how tongue-in-cheek it is. But, Stephen, some might say if it was going to happen, it would happen last year when the Texans had all the injuries to the defensive line. Maybe so, but we didn't really know about JJ showing up at NRG to work out regularly until about halfway through the season. So that played a factor. Maybe he might not have been in football shape late last year, but by early to midseason this year, he's definitely going to be. This sounds kind of real to me, if I'm being honest.
Well, I think he's probably serious about at least, approaching the situation. And I was thinking the same thing. Like, why not last year? They really could have used him last year. Of course, at the beginning of the season, you really didn't know how the Texans were going to do. You didn't know they were going to have the surprise season, but with all the injuries they had, on the defensive line and other places, that would have been the time to do it. This year, maybe not so much, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if JJ decides to make a comeback. I mean, it wouldn't be that far-fetched. I'm just not sure how it would go. I mean, if I were...
Well, let's play it out a little bit, Steve. Let's do that. If JJ Watt comes back, he's no longer an every down guy. No. So let's be realistic there. Right. This isn't the old days. He'd be more situational. But, Steven, can you imagine a D-line on third down with Will Anderson, JJ Watt, Danico Autry, and Danielle Hunter? I mean, that's unreal.
That would be unreal. And I would definitely put him in on third down situations. And, here's another way to look at it too, Robert. If he came back and played through the whole season, let's say just, by some miracle, the Texans make the Super Bowl. I mean, how cool would that be that JJ comes back this year, the Texans load up like they did during the offseason, CJ Stroud doesn't have the sophomore jinx, and they actually do better, and they actually do what I think some actually believe they can do, and that's reach the Super Bowl. So that means JJ would have a chance at a Super Bowl ring. Now, that would be cool. I mean, listen, I'm not against JJ coming back. I'm not going to sit here and say, man, I wish he'd just stay in retirement. We don't need him. I would love for him to come back, and what better way to do it than to get the Texans even further than they did last year.
What do you have, like 12 sacks out last year in Arizona?
Yeah, I think it was something like that. So he still did pretty good, but it was obvious that the wear and tear was starting to get to him a little bit. And I mean, he's only a year removed, but that can be a long time when you're talking about playing in game shape and game speed and this, that, and the other. But, if anybody could get up to speed, it would be J.J. Watt, as hard as he works and as dedicated as he is to being in shape and to helping the team. So he certainly, would not be far-fetched. And if anybody could pull it off, it would be J.J. Watt.
Yeah, 12 and a half sacks his last year in 16 games. Only played 16 of 17 that last year. But, 39 tackles, 30 solo tackles. I mean, it's not the old JJ, but 18 tackles for loss. I mean, look, 18 tackles for loss for a guy who's in your mid 30s, and that's pretty good. 33 at that time. I mean, at this point, Stephen, we're titling this, about JJ, and to answer that question, I definitely think it's realistic, and I definitely feel like there is an avenue for this to happen because the Texans have left money out there for whatever. They've got money to spare, and they still haven't signed a cornerback free agent or a safety free agent that we thought they were going to sign. One of those guys that, like a Steven Nelson or Justin Simmons, that could help. So you never know what the money is set aside for. So I definitely feel like the whole thing is all very plausible, and JJ keeps talking about it.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's talking about it just for fun,
Well, and that's why I say, I think this is mostly all JJ, approaching D'Amico and just kind of feeling things out to see if maybe he would be needed. And hey, look, think of all the excitement that it would create in addition to what's already going on. I mean, there's already a lot of buzz with the Texans, not just with the season they had last year, but the offseason that they had, in the draft. I mean, they didn't fill every need, but they did go out and get some pretty big names. And to add J.J. Watt to the mix as you go into training camp, I mean, just think of all the buzz that it would create and get you even more excited about the Texans season than you already are.
Well, you said to go into training camp. He ain't doing training camp again.
I'm talking about this going into the season. No, he's not going to be in training camp. And if he was, he's certainly not going to, do as much as everyone else is. They're not going to play much. So what I meant was that just heading into the season and getting into training camp and it's coming up. I'm just cautiously approaching this, Robert, and cautiously optimistic. I want JJ to do well. And if he's going to come back, he certainly will want to make a contribution. He's not going to want to sit on the sidelines and just be there in case someone is injured. He's going to want to play. But you're right. He's not going to play every down. He's going to have to come in on, situational things. But that would certainly be better than, just being a body to take up space unless somebody gets injured.
Yeah, JJ's better than a lot of other alternatives you'd have
Absolutely.
out there as a guy that if somebody is just looking for somebody to add to the roster late. And another big storyline besides JJ this past week is Tank Dell, because we heard from him for the first time since he was shot in the leg a couple of weeks ago. He thanked God in an Instagram post, which is where you go to thank God, I think, is Instagram.
Yeah.
And then
I don't, but other people do.
But also Cal McNair said he's going to have to rehab and get back to where he was. So, Stephen, I don't know if Cal's saying he's got to rehab, it just doesn't sound like the simple flesh wound that they first reported.
Well, what I understand, it was one of those inter-exit, isn't that what they call it? Inter-exit wounds, where it enters in the leg and then goes out the other side. When I hear that, it sounds a lot more serious than I think everybody is making it out to be. I know that Tank Dell has been in the Texans facility, I think once or twice since the shooting. But yeah, I mean, it does concern me a little bit, Robert, just in the fact that, he's already coming off of the knee injury he suffered last year, and he seemed to have that rehab, but now he's going to have to do so again, for a totally different situation. It just makes me wonder, what kind of shape Dell is going to be in, not just physically, but, mentally going into next season. And the Texans really could use him. I mean, yeah, we got Stephon Diggs and that's sort of, and we hope that Nico Collins will have a good year, but there are no guarantees. You really need Tank Dell to come in there and have the kind of season that he was having last year. So that's my biggest concern about the situation, Robert, is if he still is going to need more rehab, how ready is he going to be by the time the season starts?
He's the only starting receiver that's signed beyond this year. That's the other part about this.
Right. And that's why you need him, back there. And again, the Texans could still use some help at receiver just because of so many unknowns that are going on. And beyond this year, you may not have Stephon Diggs. You may not have Nico Collins. So that's playing into it as well.
Yeah, maybe the bullet went through him, but he's Tank Dell and he's so fast that it still doesn't realize that it went through Tank Dell, and Tank Dell still doesn't realize the bullet went through his leg or something like that. I don't know. Tank's pretty elusive like that.
He is that. And he is that. And you can just ask any defensive player that played against him last year.
All right. The other story that's going on this week for the Texans, of course, the NFL schedule rumored to be released Thursday. We know the Texans' opponents already, of course. We also know which games are on the road and which are at home. But, Stephen, is there anything that you're hoping for or worried about with the schedule that's coming out?
Well, I mean, as far as being hopeful, one thing I would say is that the Texans play the Chiefs again, and they're in Kansas City. I don't know why we have to go up to Kansas City every year. Why can't we get a home game with the Chiefs for a change? But anyway, what I would like to see, if we're going to play the Chiefs, I'd rather get them early. I wouldn't mind it being the opening game of the season. And I'm talking about for everybody. Make it the Thursday night game, or at the very least, make it the first Sunday night game, a primetime game.
When it's warm.
When it's warm. Well, that's the other consider. When it's warm. But, the Chiefs there have been times they've kind of gotten off to a little bit of a shaky start, and they kind of catch on at the end. So if I'm going to play the Chiefs, I want to play them at least in the first few weeks of the season. But how cool would it be if it was a primetime game the first week? And the Texans are going to get some primetime games. If they do, that certainly should be one of them.
You led me right into it. So, controversial opinion. I am worried about a schedule loaded with non-Sunday games. I worry about injuries with short weeks. In other words, thanks to a bunch of Monday and Thursday games. Worst case scenario, here's the other thing that I worry about. The Texans play on Christmas Day. That is a possibility because there are Christmas Day games with the NFL this year. Basically, Stephen, it would be playing Sunday, then the Saturday before Christmas, followed by Wednesday. So that would be 3 games in 10 days late in a season where you're hoping you're going to be playing in the playoffs and you're trying to stay healthy. I don't like that.
Oh, let's hope that doesn't happen, Robert. That would be the worst case scenario. That's the price you pay for having a good season. The Texans didn't have to worry about primetime last year. Their schedule is pretty even keel, mostly Sundays. And, the other thing you have to consider too is depending on how good they are and how good some of their opponents are at the end of the season, or, even before that, they could flex some games. Just because they're scheduled right now on a Sunday, let's say at noon, it doesn't mean that they couldn't flex it to a Saturday game if it's later in the season, or, change the time to a later time. So that's something else you have to think about. But yeah, that would be the worst case scenario, Robert. You talk about the schedulers dealing the Texans a cruel hand for having such a good season last year. Man, that'd be the worst punishment, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and Sunday night, I'm not mad about Sunday night games because that's still Sunday games. I just don't.
Monday and Thursday is really, and even Saturday, and you even mentioned Wednesday. There are just too many variables that could happen here.
Yeah, so I don't know, what are you guys worried about out there? Let us know. I want to hear from all of you guys on, what we need to do with this schedule that, or what you're worried about, I guess, with the schedule, I should say. So think about that for a bit.
Yeah, my biggest worry is that you look at it on paper, and of course, things change every year. Some teams you think who will do well and some who don't. But, you look at the schedule on paper for the Texans, looks pretty darn tough. If they did start out with Kansas City, you'd be talking about the defending Super Bowl champions, and you got the Buffalo Bills. You don't know what kind of season they're going to have, but you're also going to have to take on the Baltimore Ravens again. This time maybe they'll make it later in the season, but get some of those cold games out of the way. Those are my biggest things, Robert. Is later in the season they always seem to get saddled with a cold game, and that's probably going to happen with every team. But man, get those out of the way early.
Well, in the next few days, NFL draft expert Joe DeLeon will join me to give us his take on the Texans draft. So keep an eye out. Also, for Rockets fans, I'm going to have a guest on Friday, so look for that. Oh, and look for a tribute tomorrow to legendary Rockets player and coach Rudy Tomjanovich. But for now, let's transition to the Astros as we record this just prior to the Yankees series. And Stephen, what happened to Clutch City? It looked like the Rockets had passed that moniker to the Dynasty Astros, but now it's back to the old Rockets 94 Houston Chronicle headline, Choke City.
Choke City. Yeah, well, certainly, of course, that was in regard to playoffs, but in the Astros case, it's just in regard to the way this season has started. You couldn't have told me at the end of March, Robert, that the Astros would get off to this bad of a start. I would have expected them to come slowly out of the gate because they typically have done that. You look at the 2004, even the 2005 team that went to the World Series. They came out slowly and didn't really turn it on until after the All-Star break. But even they didn't start out this badly. And the biggest reason, Robert, well, certainly one of the biggest, not the biggest, but it's definitely up there, is the hittings with runners in scoring position. It is just not happening. And even some of the hitters that you would count on at any situation are not coming through with runners in scoring position.
And you choke in late innings because your bullpen stinks too late in night innings. And
you add that in, but it's like when you're losing, 5-0 and 2-1 and that sort of thing, and even 6-3. Yeah, the bullpen is at fault for a lot of this too, but the offense has definitely bogged down in places that you really needed them to come through, especially if the pitching is not what it should be.
You know, I teased off the top of the show which three Astros are our biggest concern right now. And Stephen, I'm sure you can make an argument for 10 guys, but I want to parse it down to a top three for time purposes, because we're not going to be here for 5 hours. But let's go one at a time. Who's number one on your list?
Well, I've already talked about this before, Robert, so it should come as no surprise. Alex Bregman is number one. And yeah, I know that he gets off to slow starts. I understand that. I mean, I think it's happened every year. This is the worst of starts for him. He's supposed to be healthier. He's supposed to have trained more. But I just wonder, Robert, if some of this is mental just because he's playing for a contract year. And sometimes, you can think about that a little too much and you start putting pressure on yourself. Alex Bregman is just not. I mean, this is one reason that I've even said this before. I wouldn't sign Alex to the kind of long-term deal that he's probably seeking. Now, if he keeps having this kind of a year, there may be a lot of other teams that would shy away, and maybe the Astros could get him on a discount. But yeah, this is just not the kind of start that Alex Bregman needed to have for so many reasons, and certainly because some of the other hitters are starting slowly, and that's why the Astros have started out the way they are. But he's a big reason, and his power it's like Jeremy Pena's power from last year. It's disappeared. That's another big concern for me with him.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about this is not a typical slow start. It's not, because career April-March, his OPS is 737. We're 5 days into May, and it's 553. This is like a almost 200-point drop in his horrible historic starts. I mean, that's saying something right there.
Yeah, that's why I was saying that is, and I've even seen the numbers that it's obviously, a 730, OPS is not the worst in the world. And, we think every year, well, Alex gets off to a slow start. Well, that's because he turns it on later on and it's so hot. But yeah, this is worse than bad for him.
My number one might be a shock to some of you because he hasn't been awful, but when the best player on your team has dropped off a cliff, it's a big deal. Yordan has a 766 OPS. No, it's not Abreu or Bregman bad, but his worst month last season, was a 900 OPS. So we're talking about 134 points less than his worst month. You got to go back to August of 2022 to find a worst month stretch for Yordan. And that was a shortened month, and he was coming off an injury. Stephen, we know Yordan carries this team in stretches, and he's a big reason why this offense is just more consistent than it's been this year in recent years.
Yeah, and when Yordan does struggle, traditionally, it isn't for very long. I mean, he might go 0 for 10 at the most, and then he's going to get a hit here, hit there, and then he's going to catch fire. We keep waiting for that to happen, Robert, and we just don't see it. I mean, he's been going kind of in snatches where you think, oh, he's coming back from it. So it is a little bit of a concern. I mean, I didn't have him on my list yet just because I believe that he is one player that can get it together. Now, you give him another month, and he probably would be in my top three. He is a concern, certainly, for me. So now it doesn't surprise me that you put him on your list because it's just gone much longer than we're used to seeing with Yordan and just him not being productive.
Who's number two for you?
Hunter Brown is number two. And I tell you, I keep waiting for him to break out of this, and I'm wondering, maybe he also needs to get sent down and work on some things, the way JP France was and some of the others that, but of course, the biggest problem right now is, you've got so many injuries in your pitching staff. You can't afford to just send everybody down when they struggle, but this has gone on for an awfully long time for Hunter. And the first inning is his worst. And the command is just not there. So yeah, he definitely, especially with the struggles that we've had in the pitching and all the injuries, the Astros need Hunter Brown to get it together. They just need it.
My number two Astro concern is a biggie, Josh Hader. And it's not just because he's the closer. It's because it was a 5-year investment. I just mentioned Yordan, who, like Hader, is signed through 2028. If Hader and Yordan have long-term issues, that just doesn't torpedo this season. That torpedoes the franchise for years. And if they return to form, we could just brush it all off as maybe this is a bad year if they can't get it together, get things back on track by next year, the same way the 2000 Astros were a blip in the run from 97 to 2005, Stephen.
Yeah, it is definitely a concern. And, when you sign a big contract like that, there are always the expectations on you, especially the first year. And, he's one of so many guys who seem to struggle that first year when you sign that big deal. You don't live up to the hype or the expectations. And he's clearly the guy that is not doing that. I mean, I kind of went back and forth between him and Ryan Presley because I just felt like, Ryan Presley, yeah, I know he changed roles. He's a setup guy now, but it's not totally unfamiliar to him. And I think, in both cases, I really think it's mental for different reasons. I think with Josh, I think he's pressing too much, trying to, live up to the contract. And with Ryan Presley, I think it's just a case of, maybe he's just not feeling as good about being put in a setup position and being taken out of the closer as we're led to believe, as he's publicly saying.
Is that 3 on your list then, Ryan Presley?
Yeah, I would probably go with Hader just because it has just been, he's the closer. He's blown so many chances. Well, the Astros haven't had a lot of save chances, but he's blown leads. And I know the other day he pitched an extra inning, gave up that one run. But all in all, Hader certainly is the biggest disappointment. But Ryan Presley he'd kind of be my honorable mention, as we'd be right behind him.
I'm going to continue on the same track that I'm going with my number 3. And again, it's the long track. I'm thinking long term here. And my number 3 Astro concern is Yainer Diaz. And I know everybody's saying, why Yainer? We finally have a catcher who can hit. How can you complain? He's hitting 274 with a 714 OPS. But here's the deal. The defensive analytics are not good. He's bottom half defensively in pretty much every major number. But you don't worry about the offense. You don't worry about the defense might not be the best if he's handling a pitching staff well. While I'm not blaming the Astros pitching issues on Yainer, we're not seeing instances where he's calming down a young guy or straightening things out with some guy that's in some issues on the mound and stuff like that. And Stephen, it's just got to be, he's got to be off the charts offensively, not just a solid 714 OPS to justify being poor to mid at all of his defensive qualities.
Yeah, and this is where, and I know it was talked about so much, but I think this is the reason, and you're seeing it now, of why the Astros would miss Martin Maldonado. He certainly aren't going to miss his bat, because Yainer is more than making up for that. But it's his leadership qualities, the way he handles the pitching staff. And he was a better defensive catcher, although I know his last year, it seemed like even his defense went down. But certainly this year, it's just abysmal. I mean, I'm surprised more teams aren't running on the Astros more than they are, just based on that. I mean, I don't know what you say as far as Yainer being a better leader. You are who you are personality-wise. And I think, he can get better at that in certain ways. But, to expect him to be a Maldi in that situation, I just don't think he has it. I don't think he's that type of guy. But the defensive aspect of it, and the receiving part, the framing, those are things he definitely has to get better at to be a better catcher all the way around. And, grant you, it's hard to find a really good hitting catcher and a really good defensive catcher. There are a handful of them in the major leagues, but I don't know if Yainer Diaz can be that guy, but he certainly could improve defensively for sure.
Here's the other thing that kind of bugs me, and it's not as bad this year as I feel like it is as I watch the games, but he hit 225 last year with runners in scoring position. This year, he's hitting in the 260s. Again, though, it doesn't feel as good as 260 something. And Stephen, I don't know if you are paying attention during those at-bats, but it just seems like when he's got runners in scoring position in big situations, he thinks he's got to hit to get the run in instead of, let me take some pitches. I'm allowed to draw a walk. I'm allowed to work the count. He just gets panicky up there. There's no other way to describe it.
Yeah. And I think, I hope that some of that is just due to the fact that, he's still a young guy trying to figure things out. And yeah, I mean, last year he had a good year, but some hitters, it takes them longer. When you put them in pressure situations, not just everybody can do that. And in Yainer's case, I think that, hopefully the hitting coaches will work with him a little bit more on being patient. And I think, that's the case with a lot of these Astros hitters. The deeper we get into this, I think the more that they are putting pressure on themselves is that, we got to score more runs, especially with runners on base. And then you start swinging at pitches that you shouldn't. And, holding off on pitches that you could draw some walks, get on base, somebody else can pick you up. That is something that Yainer has to get better at. And I'm hoping that it is something that can be straightened out and not something that we're going to be talking about for the next few years of his career when he comes up offensively.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I'm starting to question. And I mean, it's, Stephen, you have to be patient. I mean, he hasn't really even got a year's worth of at-bats because,
right.
He wasn't a regular last year. We're closing in on that, though.
But that's why I'm saying I think he is still a young hitter trying to figure things out. And he's also taking over as the number one catcher, and that's a big responsibility. And, the question I posed, I think it was on our Astros preview, that's why I kind of was cautious about what kind of a year Yainer was going to have. One of my biggest questions is, can he balance the responsibility of having to be the number one guy behind the plate, handling the pitching staff, and still be the kind of hitter that we're expecting him to be? I still think that's a question, as we go further into the season.
Also, regarding his issues with runners in scoring position, I feel like we're at the point in the season, and I know this is like a strange thought, but look, Mauricio Dubon is the only guy that's hitting with runners in scoring position. So Mauricio Dubon should be batting ahead of Yainer Diaz in the lineup right now. He should be batting 5th or 6th, and Yainer should be batting 6th or 7th, depending on what you're putting out there. I mean, even Bregman, who's struggled, is hitting 290 with runners in scoring position. And then you go look at Yainer, and he's batting 263. So it's even worse than Bregman, as much as Bregman is struggling. I just think, move Mauricio Dubon up, let him hit with runners in scoring position. He's 556 with a 1248 OPS with runners in scoring position. I mean, he's 10 of 18, Stephen, 10 of 18.
Yeah, it might not be a bad idea to put him 5th, if you think about it. I mean, I would say try him in the 5th spot. And I know, there are a number of hitters that need to go down in the lineup, and you can only do so many. And, if you're bringing up guys like Joey Loperfido, and then you're having John Singleton play more, I mean, they've got to be at the very lowest end of your batting order. You can't, so you can't put those guys there. But I would be one who would lobby to see Mauricio Dubon hit 5th and see if he can continue to do that, because you'll get more chances that way, I think, in those situations.
Yeah, let's just we're going to put aside all how the Astros can sell off this entire team that everybody's now talking about. We're going to put that off until that becomes a little bit more realistic. But we'll have plenty of other Astros conversation in the weeks to come. So keep an eye out for that. Keep an eye out for our coming up shows with the Texans and the Rockets and stuff later this week. Got a bunch of stuff coming, so you're definitely going to want to stay tuned. And as always, Stephen, thanks so much for doing this. We'll talk to you again soon.
You bet, Robert. And let me just throw this in. It's only 2 months until training camp. Just saying, not that long.
Thank goodness. All right, take care, everybody.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.